My name is Thalia, and the death of my life's work was signed into being not in a boardroom, but on the sun-drenched terrace of a villa in Santorini. It was our 5th wedding anniversary. My husband, Leo, had orchestrated the entire trip, a surprise. White stone, blue domes, the Aegean stretching into infinity. "You've been working so hard, my love," he'd murmured, his lips against my temple as we watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of peach and violet. "You need to remember what living feels like." And I did. For a week, I forgot about burn rates, scalability, and supply chain algorithms. I was just Thalia, Leo's wife, sipping Acertico and feeling the sun kiss my shoulders. On our last night, over a dinner of grilled octopus and too much wine, he took my hands. His eyes, the color of aged whiskey, held mine with an intensity that felt like a vow. "Thalia, what you've built, it's a masterpiece. Selenia Tech isn't just a company, it's a legacy." He paused, his thumb stroking my knuckles. But a legacy trapped in a founder's hands is a limited one. You're carrying the entire weight. What if you could secure its future, our future, and finally breathe? He painted the picture with the skill of the master strategist he was. Leo wasn't a lawyer. He was a corporate philosopher, a sought-after growth whisperer for Fortune 500 companies. He spoke in visions. He described a partnership with Ethelgard Ventures, a firm he'd been casually advising. They weren't just investors. They were stewards of innovation. They would inject capital, bring global expertise, and install a professional CEO, freeing me to guide the vision from the board without the crushing operational load. I'd retain a significant stake, a prestigious chairmanship. And us? We'd have financial freedom that was real, not just projected on a spreadsheet. We could start the family we'd postponed. We could buy the old orchard house in the Hudson Valley he'd always loved. We could live. "Think of it not as selling," he said, his voice a low, compelling current. "Think of it as launching Selenia into its next cosmic phase, and us into ours." The wine, the sunset, the feel of his hands, it all conspired against my instincts. Selenia Tech was my firstborn. I coded its first prototype on a secondhand laptop in my grad school library, surviving on vending machine noodles and a terror of failure. It was a biotech firm specializing in AI-driven genomic sequencing, matching rare disease patients with bespoke, repurposed drug therapies. It was fragile, beautiful, and entirely mine. Letting go felt like surrendering a child, but Leo framed it as adoption by a wonderful family. Not loss, but elevation. The courtship by Ethelgard was flawlessly choreographed. The lead partner, a woman named Margot, with a crisp British accent and a disarmingly warm smile, felt like a kindred spirit. She spoke of impact scaling and ethical frontiers. She praised my life's work with a depth that felt authentic. Leo, ever present but never obtrusive, would give me a subtle, reassuring nod during the tough negotiations. "See," that nod said, "they get it. They get you." 6 months later, in a minimalist conference room that smelled of money and lemon verbena, I signed the final documents. I used the fountain pen Leo had gifted me for our first anniversary, its platinum nib gliding over the page like a skater on ice. A feeling of profound emptiness hollowed me out, but I mistook it for exhaustion. Leo squeezed my shoulder. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered. "Our future starts now." The first year was the idyll he promised. We bought the orchard house. I planted lavender and apple trees. I attended quarterly Selenia board meetings, where the reports were glossy and the growth metrics impressive, if increasingly impersonal. The culture I'd nurtured, one of obsessive care, of treating each data point as a life, was being streamlined into efficiency protocols. It hurt, but I'd made my choice. I focused on Leo, on our plans for a nursery in the east-facing room. The unraveling began with Ascent. Leo returned from a strategic retreat with Ethelgard in Singapore smelling of a specific, intoxicating perfume. Not his cologne. This was jasmine, tuberose, and something metallic like ozone after a storm. It was distinctive, unforgettable. "The dinners are so lavish," he laughed when I mentioned it, stripping off his shirt. "The hotel's signature scent gets on everything. It's overpowering." I wanted to believe him, but the scent became a ghost in our home. I'd catch a whisper of it on a blazer left on a chair, in the car days later. A haunting. The second thread was a name. During a board call, Margot mentioned a new executive initiative spearheaded by their recently promoted partner of biotech integration, a woman named Cassia Vale. "She's a force of nature," she said warmly. "Former Olympic-level swimmer turned biochemist turned venture capitalist. She's going to propel Selenia's clinical trial partnerships to new heights." Cassia Vale. The name was unusual, striking. It stuck in my mind like a burr. A week later, browsing a glossy business quarterly online, I found a profile on Ethelgard's Rising Stars. There she was, Cassia Vale. The photograph was not a standard headshot. It was an action shot, almost predatory. She was caught mid-stride, exiting a black town car, her head turned toward the camera, a half-smile on her lips. Sleek, dark hair pulled into a severe knot, eyes that held a chilling, familiar confidence. She was wearing a cream-colored blazer, and pinned to its lapel was a brooch I knew intimately, a vintage Art Deco clip of a diving swallow made of platinum and diamond chips. I had given that brooch to Leo for his 30th birthday. "For the man who helps ideas take flight," I had written in the card. The room around me dissolved. The sound of the orchard leaves outside the window became a distant roar. I felt a cold so profound it burned. This was no coincidence. This was a flag, planted on conquered land. I did not confront. I did not weep. A strange, crystalline calm descended. My love for Leo didn't shatter, it transmuted. It became fuel. My investigation began not with spies, but with spreadsheets. I was, after all, a data scientist at my core. I audited our joint finances from the past 3 years with a new hypothesis. Leo hadn't just facilitated the sale, he had been compensated for it, personally and secretly. It was in the labyrinth of shell companies where I found the first footprint. Leo had a dormant LLC, Orion Consultancy, he'd once used for minor speaking gigs. In the month following the Selenia sale, it received a single wire transfer from a Bermudan entity called Perseus Holdings. The amount was not life-changing, but significant, $250,000, a success fee. Perseus Holdings, after hours of cross-referencing through opaque international registries, had a tenuous but traceable link to a silent partner in Ethelgard Ventures. So, he'd gotten a kickback. But that felt small, mercenary, but not worthy of the grand, years-long performance. This was about more than money. I turned to the human element, Cassia Vale. Her background was, as Margot said, impressive. An Olympic alternate in the 200-meter butterfly, a Stanford biochemistry PhD. Her career before Ethelgard was a blur of elite consultancies. And then, through a former colleague's drunken LinkedIn post from 2 years prior, I found a ghost. A grainy photo from an industry yacht party. There, on the deck, was Leo. and tucked under his arm, her face turned into a shoulder, was a younger Cassia. The caption, written by the colleague, read, "When the smartest people in the room find each other. #power couple. #biotech future." 2 years ago, a full year before he began the campaign to sell Selenia, a year before he introduced me to Aethelgard. The timeline was no longer a suspicion, it was an architecture. Leo hadn't fallen for a colleague at the firm buying my company. He had been in a long-term relationship with a woman he then helped install inside the firm buying my company. He had used his influence, his reputation, to get her the position. The sale of Selenia was their joint venture. His compensation wasn't just the secret fee, it was her ascension, funded by the liquidation of my life's work. My success was the dowry for their power union. The Our Future speech in Santorini wasn't for us. It was the closing argument in a case he'd been building with her for years. I was the asset to be leveraged, then retired. The rage that followed was not fiery, but glacial. It moved slowly, carving canyons of resolve. I would not simply expose them. I would make the very foundation of their victory the instrument of their ruin. I reached out to a former Selenia employee, Benji, my first hire, a brilliant, ethically rigid bioinformatician who had left shortly after the acquisition, disillusioned by the new direction. Over bitter coffee, I laid out my theory. His face paled, then set with grim determination. "They're talking about pivoting the core algorithm," he said, "from rare diseases to cosmetic longevity, skin cream diagnostics. It's a perversion." He still had backdoor access to the development server. He provided me with a gold mine, commit logs, internal chat transcripts. They showed Cassia, under the guise of strategic realignment, actively pushing to dilute the ethical review protocols I'd built, the very protocols that ensured patient welfare over profit. In one shocking exchange, she dismissed a compliance officer's concern with, "The founder's sentimentality is not a scalable business model." I had my weapon. Not adultery, but corruption. Not a personal betrayal, but a professional one that endangered the company's soul and potentially its legal standing. My revenge required a stage. I scheduled a one-on-one review with Margot at Aethelgard under the guise of discussing my evolving role as chairwoman. I arrived early. The Aethelgard offices were a temple to discreet wealth. As I was led to Margot's suite, I passed an open conference room. Inside, Leo and Cassia stood at a whiteboard. He was pointing at a graph, she was nodding, a hand resting possessively on the small of his back. She threw her head back and laughed at something he said, the column of her throat exposed. She was wearing the diving swallow brooch. They didn't see me. I was a ghost in the machine I built. In Margot's office, I declined tea. I placed a single slim folder on her immaculate desk. "Before we begin, Margot, you need to be aware of a critical liability within your Selenia investment." I walked her through it. The timeline of Leo and Cassia's relationship, evidenced by the photo, the Orion consultancy payment from the Aethelgard Link shell company, and finally, the internal documents showing Cassia's deliberate attempts to undermine the core ethical safeguards of Selenia's IP. Safeguards that were a key part of the company's valuation and legal standing. "You purchased Selenia under the pretense of stewarding its mission," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You were, in fact, the final piece in a long con orchestrated by your own partner and my husband. They used your capital and credibility to execute a personal and professional coup. In the process, Cassia Vale is actively de-risking the company by engaging in practices that could trigger FDA scrutiny and patient litigation. The founder's sentimentality," she mocks, "is your legal firewall." Margot's face, usually a mask of placid competence, cycled through shock, fury, and finally a cold, calculating stillness. She was a capitalist first. This was a risk model she understood perfectly. "What is it you want, Thalia?" she asked, her voice clipped. I want the deal unwound. Not the sale, that's done. I want my intellectual and ethical property back. You will spin off the core Selenia algorithm and its associated ethical framework into a new independent nonprofit, which I will control. Aethelgard will fund the spin-off with a grant equal to twice the secret fee paid to Leo. You will terminate Cassia Vale for cause, citing gross misconduct and conflict of interest. And you will provide me with all documentation of Leo's clandestine dealings with your firm. And if we refuse, then I file a whistleblower complaint with the SEC and the FDA tomorrow morning with all this evidence. The story won't be about a failed marriage. It will be about how Aethelgard Ventures, blinded by greed and complicit in a fraud, allowed a rogue partner to gut a life-saving ethical protocol for profit. Your fund's reputation will be ash. She stared at me for a long minute. We'll need confidentiality. Of course, my dispute is not with Aethelgard. It's with the parasites who infected it.
The settlement was drafted in days. The lawyers moved with sterile efficiency. The nonprofit, which I named the Alethea Foundation, Truth, was established. The funds flowed. The final act was at the Orchard House. Leo arrived, buoyant, carrying a bottle of champagne. "To new beginnings," he announced, seeing the papers on the farmhouse table. He thought it was about the nursery plans. "Sit down, Leo." I poured the champagne into 2 glasses. I pushed one toward him. Then I slid the Aethelgard settlement summary across the worn oak. I watched his eyes move over the lines. The color drained from his face, leaving a waxy gray pallor. His hand trembled, making the crystal flute chime softly against the table. "Thalia, these are lies. Cassia is just a colleague, a brilliant mind. This payment, it was a consulting—" "Stop," I said, my voice quiet. "I've seen the photo from the yacht. I've traced the money from Perseus. I've read the chat logs where your brilliant mind mocks my life's work as sentimentality. You sold me and my company to bankroll your future with her. You were the architect, she was the project manager, and I was the demolition site." He crumbled then, not into tears of remorse, but into the sputtering panic of a strategist whose master plan has been Niyang engineered. "You don't understand the pressure. You were always so consumed, so perfect with your noble cause. She saw me. She wanted to build an empire with me, not just admire me from the sidelines of yours." There it was, the rot at the core. Not greed, but a bruised ego. A need to be the sun, not the moon reflecting my light. You could have just asked for a divorce, Leo. And get nothing? Be the forgotten husband of Thalia the visionary? No. This way we both won. You didn't win, I said, standing. You committed a profound, premeditated theft. You stole my company's independence to gift wrap it for your mistress. And now I've taken it back. The heart of Selenia, its ethics, its purpose, is mine again, locked safely away in a foundation you can never touch. Aethelgard has cast Cassia out. And you? I looked at him, this man I had loved, who had held my face in his hands in the Santorini sunset. You have nothing. No kickback fee, no powerful partner, no wife. Just the debt on this orchard house, which I will be filing for sole possession of tomorrow. I left him there, sitting in the gathering twilight, the untouched champagne going flat. The divorce was a swift, surgical severance. The prenup, which he'd once said was "for my protection too," was ironclad. With the evidence of his fraud, he walked away with nothing but his clothes and his crippling professional disgrace. Margot made sure the story of his and Cassia's ethical breach circulated in precise, damning whispers through the tight-knit venture capital world. He is now a ghost in that landscape, a cautionary tale whispered over single malt scotch. Cassia Vale vanished from the industry.
The diving swallow brooch was returned by courier in a plain box. I had it melted down. As for me, I run the Alethea Foundation. We license the Selenia core algorithms to truly ethical partners. The orchard house is quiet. The east-facing room is my study, filled with light and books. I am no one's wife, no one's counterpart in a clandestine plot. Leo and Cassia taught me that the most dangerous predator isn't the one who attacks your company in the market. It's the one who lays its head in your lap at night, learns the rhythm of your heart, and then sells the blueprint to the highest bidder. They thought they were playing multi-dimensional chess, but they forgot that in any game, the player who owns the board defines the rules. And in the end, I didn't just take my pieces off their board. I set the whole damn table on fire. And from the ashes, I built a new one, entirely my own.